Welcome back, my friends, to the ecoChristian podcast. We're exploring what it means to be Christian on planet Earth. I'm your host, Caleb Cray Haynes, and maybe whether because it was Halloween recently or we celebrated All Saints Day, Dia de los Muertos, or just the election, I'm compelled to talk about death. Am I right? Death. It helps keep all this in perspective, doesn't it? I mean, life is just brief. We are here on this planet for a moment, and so how do we live it? And and that's a lot of what we talk about here in this podcast is the importance of how we live our lives in relationship to God's creation and this place that God has made for us to exist, that we exist within in creation, and our death is part of that. And there's actually no such thing as having an ecologically rich conversation without addressing death. Right? Because nature, creation, ecology simply would not exist without it. Because the only way that all this continues to happen, that life continues to emerge, that food continues to grow, that we are alive, is because of the large and small cycles of natural death that occurs within the cosmos. Am I right? So part of what we have to acknowledge just around, I think, even the term death, what are the images that are conjured for you and for us and within our own minds when we speak about that? And maybe you've never even really stop to consider the ways in which your past or your upbringing, your culture has informed the way you've oriented yourself around the idea and even the terminology of death, or the ways in which, just our history has sort of framed death for us. Images like the Grim Reaper and things like that grab us, and culturally, we talk little of it. And as if we say anything, we might be, if we call it out, maybe that puts us on the next sweep through of Final Destination. If you know, you know. And so, in fact, for many of us, we even don't speak much of our loved ones who have passed, not like other cultures do, at least. And for some, we've lost, I wonder if we've lost our cultural ability to remember the dead well, and death even becomes taboo. So our bodies are made up of and full of living organisms. In fact, the trillions of living cells that make up your body are right now hard at work keeping you alive and everything functioning. Like your nerves, your muscles, your blood oxygen deliveries. And what's so fascinating further are the trillions of microorganisms living in you. Like there's bacteria, viruses, fungi, parasites, and they're all getting together for this microbiome party inside of you right now, living in our skin, our digestive tract, and who knows where else in there. They're helping us be healthy, defending us from harmful things, harmful bacteria, regulating our bodies, and so on. And the relationship between these cells and microorganisms are symbiotic, giving us good living bodies. Our bodies are like living reefs for microscopic life, is one way to think about it. And all of those little who's down in the Whoville of our microbiome are part of our body because of the environment in which we inhabit, namely Earth, namely our food, namely the particular soil that your food came from. Friends, this is a critical part of what makes us, quote, earthlings. And the reason why, if you somehow figured out, right, if we somehow became permanently beings who permanently lived in space somewhere, upon some craft, or even on some other planet, we really can't even fathom who we would become, because it would totally alter our body's composure as it is without Earth. Does that make sense? You'd actually cease to be earthlings or soilings, right? We would no longer be, as Genesis says, the Ha-Adam, the human from the Adamah, the ground. We would be something other than that, because our bodies, our very beings, are made up of the living earth. So that's something to germinate on. Okay, that's what's happening right now. So part of what we have to faithfully unearth here is a conversation about how we see the natural world. Much of our environmental problems today stem from the perspective that the natural world is dead. And it is this dead perspective that simultaneously offers us, we think, a license to do with creation whatever we want, because it isn't living. This is a perspective unique to our time, though, and certainly not shared by indigenous cultures and people groups throughout history. And science agrees. The more we learn about the soil and all creation is that it is teeming with life. It is alive, that life is there beyond our line of sight. To see God's beautiful design in creation properly, we must see the world through a lens of aliveness. As a recent conversation I was fortunate to have with Norman Wiersbe about some of this. It's going to be in an episode in a couple weeks. But what does it mean that this aliveness is something that precedes our ability to care for creation well? The way God designed creation is that even our bodies and all the matter therein return to that which is alive, not dead, part of the created world, not forever separated from it, but together with the greater ecosystem of creation that we have been with all throughout our life. When I was a kid, wow, we just went to an exorbitant amount of funerals for whatever reason. We just knew a lot of people, and a lot of people that we were close to passed away, and maybe we just, maybe that was just part of the ethos of what it meant to be part of our family. But we made sure to go to the funerals. And so anyway, I was at a funeral home. It felt like a lot growing up, and so by the time I was in my late teens, I so strongly associated the smell of a bouquet of flowers with death and funeral homes that I literally couldn't stand the smell of flowers. It's like, how sad is that? But it was even more because I got to where I just loathed these funeral homes. The somberness of it, the purple carpet, the curtains, like the low lighting, the way we all dressed, right? Even the ways in which we often display our loved ones in these outfits, like a suit, like, friends, like, this is like, right, like, do not bury me in a suit, please. If you're hearing this, And if they're not playing Get What You Give by New Radicals at my funeral, somebody better stand up and do something, okay? And so, are we celebrating life here, or are we celebrating death? And so I found myself in these spaces frequently that framed death as if something that as something that we're just trying to get it over with in order that we don't have to see it anymore, that we don't have to deal with it anymore, and it's not integrated into the greater whole of existence. You know, in 1 Corinthians 15, we call this the resurrection chapter. And Paul writes, the last enemy that will be abolished is death. So death in the traditional Christian sense is viewed as the outcome of the fall, right? Adam and Eve, they sin, introducing death into the world is usually how we read that. And death becomes a villain in which we have kind of anthropomorphized as one in which God will put under his feet, literally. For he must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet. The last enemy that will be abolished is death. And wow, cool. I think this is a critical understanding of God's cosmic work in dismantling suffering. But I wonder if we aren't missing some hidden secrets within the life of creation if we don't wrestle with this on a lower level. And I want to say that I think this is, of course, a powerful, important framework for us as believers. But like so many other things, we must allow the tension to exist for different postures toward this notion of death, even. Especially as we serve a God who, in the person of Jesus, takes up his cross, willingly loses his life, and then calls us to do the same. And I wonder, hang with me, what does it mean that the path toward death is something that not only we don't have to be afraid of, but maybe we can even welcome? And of course, we're not talking about welcoming tragedy, but death does eventually come for all of us. And so while quote-unquote defeat is a word that offers hope in narratives of death, I can't help but wonder if quote-unquote welcome is also one that offers hope. We are able to welcome that doorway because we know it has been overcome. We know that there is more. That the way, again, patterned for us by Jesus himself, death is defeated is through the entering into it. Jesus overcame death not by avoiding death, right? And so I think there's something to marinate on there. Here's something deeper to consider, that death and decay, though we believe are things that God is eschatologically undoing, however that looks, is, of course, a mystery. It is also part of God's beautiful design. Again, without death and decay, we would have no life on earth. There would be no juicy pineapples to enjoy. There would be no Friday night pizza movies. There would be no guacamole tacos. There would be no local grass-fed, so forth, so on. There would be no microbiome. We would have no homes made of wood or places to visit. Ironically, without death, there would be nothing. Because the ending of one thing becomes the beginning of matter. The death of stars to the life of trees. God shapes and reshapes history through energy and matter, and we're on the ride of our lives, literally, as we get to be a part of it. So, I want to do a little confessing, and I hope you'll join me in it. And then I want to talk about some practices of creation care around our death and burial. Okay, so first, I I want to confess that what happens after death is officially above my pay grade. And how God is going to redeem all this, Jesus' resurrection work is beyond my understanding. And that's why we call it faith. And I'll just say that. And I know that whatever happens to our bodies after we die, be it in a casket vault or dismembered in a field, that's beyond our pay grade. Okay. Second, as Paul writes in Colossians 1:20 and John at the end of Revelation, and even the prophets recognize, hey, all things here, heaven and earth, all of creation is going to be wrapped up into this divine rescue at the end. In other words, I don't understand it all, but I know that the gospel is not anthropocentric. It's not all about me, but about the reconciliation, as Paul writes, of all things through the blood of Christ. Okay. Take a deep breath, throwing a lot of things on the table. But here's what I want to get to. I want to talk about burials. What we do know and what we hopefully can control is our part in being faithful with matter and creation. And to do that, I thought for fun, I'd read a little bit of my book, Garbage Theology, because I get into some of that in a section there. So yeah, I thought this might be a good segue for us, so it'd be a little fun. So as read by the author. Okay, here we go. Typically, here in the States, when you die, your body is placed inside an extra plush, shiny casket. Odds are this fancy new chariot is nicer than anything you actually drove when you were alive, except without the Bluetooth capabilities. But this Rolls Royce of death never even touches the dirt. The casket is lowered into a larger vault, typically made of reinforced concrete. Once your casket is closed and your vault is sealed and there is 6 feet of dirt on top of you, dead or alive, you aren't getting out. Let us pause here for a moment. If this isn't your chosen path, odds are your body will be either placed in an above-ground mausoleum that is equally fortified, or you're cremated. For those interested in such things, one cremation is the equivalent to a 500-mile road trip's worth of emissions. I think if we are honest with ourselves, none of these options sound natural. That's mainly because, none of these options are natural. When I think about being buried in one of these cushy boxes and lowered into a vault, I don't care what you say, it's disturbing. Skipping on down. Beyond caskets and land use, it must be stated that even our deaths can be wasted. Our bodies are meant to be returned to the earth. This frail skin and these organs are all part of the earth from where they came. Our bodies contain iron, zinc, sulfur, calcium, and phosphorus that can enrich the soil. It's wondrous to think that our bodies might return to the ground. The Adamah from which God breathed life into us, we finally return to in death. It is the exhale of God's life-giving inhale. Our bodies are meant to be a gift back to the earth as we ourselves once again become life-giving compost. Yet, we live in an age that robs the earth of our bodies after we are gone. Our concrete tombs prevent the necessary cycle of decomposition that we find that we and the earth need. There are more people alive than ever before in history. Our cemeteries and our cremations are already altering the chemistry of the earth. And as billions more die over the coming decades, this will be an issue we must address. So ask yourself, why waste your body? The life inside us should be recycling in the soil we have so eagerly extracted from our entire lives. We've surely taken our share from the earth and life. It is a travesty for us to keep taking from it in our death. How might the people of God embody hope for the world through our death and decay? Oh man. So, if you want to keep reading any of that, you can pick up a copy of Garbage Theology. It's also an audiobook. You can just keep listening. So, yeah. At the end here, I want to share with you all some of the new and different ways that I've learned about in which you can seek sustainable burial options. And just some of the creativity that's funneling around this, because it's something that lots of folks are taking notice of. So current funeral practices are kind of environmentally problematic, and each year 2.7 million people or so die just in the United States, and most are buried in a conventional cemetery or cremated. And conventional burial consumes valuable urban land, right? And land anywhere. It pollutes the soil. It contributes to climate change through the resource-intensive manufacturing and transport of caskets and headstones and metals and grave liners. So yeah, I wanted to share some of the findings, particularly around reefs. There are multiple companies who have come out around the States and other parts of the world that are creating reefs out of deceased loved ones. And so basically how this works, so the backside of this is that cremation still happens in these scenarios. So, but in this situation, instead of taking your loved one's ashes and putting them in an urn on the mantle in your home to kind of stare at you for the rest of your life, you can integrate these remains of your loved one into a reef system for the ocean. And so these are artificial reefs that are created and paid for through our funerals to create new and lush habitats and ecosystems under the ocean. So one such is called eternal reefs. And so eternal reefs are permanent living legacies that memorialize the passing of a loved one by helping to preserve and protect the marine environment for the benefit of future generations. And so how it works is after cremation, the ashes of, your loved one is mixed in with this special concrete, and they create these basically reef ball structures, and is set out to a certain site in the ocean where these artificial reefs are growing and becoming habitats for marine life over time. And so there are these really cool, so there's several different ones out there that look different ways, but it's all about restoring marine ecosystems, which is really cool. And then you get like GPS coordinates for families to visit. You can do, this whole memorial on the ocean. And it's just a really different kind of neat way to remember your loved ones, but to also do something in their memory and honor that will live on, but also be a means of blessing for the earth. Another one is called Neptune Memorial Reef. Similar idea, right? A structure that houses cremated remains. There's sort of an underwater mausoleum And there's another one called Living Reef Memorial, Memorial Reefs International. And so, yeah, you get the idea. There's other companies out there doing similar things in the soil where they're taking your ashes, putting it in kind of a seed pod situation, and then burying it, which I find interesting. There's other ones called that are for sea burials, like bio urns, and it's a biodegradable urn for water burials, and so they kind of float around and begin to disseminate the remains of your loved one as it sort of like slowly sinks to the ocean floor. So there's some different things like that out there, some more ecologically minded than others, but we won't get into all that. Before we're done, I wanted to share a couple of my favorite options. One is kind of like state of the art, quote unquote, and one of these is about the opposite of state of the art as you can get. And because cremation still burns fossil fuels and emits carbon dioxide and particulates into the atmosphere, I think returning to the soil and just the most natural way is just beautiful, personally the way God intended it to be. But the first place I wanted to share was Recompose. It's actually in Seattle, Washington. It's a newer concept, and it's really, you can check it out. I'm going to leave links for all these places in the show notes. They do just such a beautiful job at this work of human composting. And it's a sustainable alternative to cremation. They say our process is tailored to each individual and takes between 8 to 12 weeks. And once your person has come into our care, their body will be gently transformed into soil. Their soil can be used to nourish gardens and plants or to scatter across favorite places. So it's a really cool concept where basically your loved one is naturally decomposed in the soil at their facility, and then after it's done, you have about a cubic yard of soil to then take and put in your garden or so forth and so on. And so, quote, the biological process mimics the Earth's natural cycles in a controlled environment and is similar to what occurs in the forest floor as organic material decomposes and becomes topsoil. Human composting is powered by beneficial microbes that occur naturally on our bodies and in the environment. And so, yeah, I think you're going to see more places like this appearing across the world as time goes on, and especially in urban spaces where that is kind of the most natural option. So the other place I wanted to share right here at the end is a place close by to us in Nashville. It's kind of up on the plateau. It's called Larkspur, and it's just a beautiful place. A couple years ago, a friend of ours passed away, and we were able to go there in person for the ceremony. But Larkspur is a conservation burial ground in Tennessee, and it comes out of a protected green space and is dedicated to natural burial. And it's probably everything that you're sort of thinking of. I mean, right, for thousands of years, this is really how humans were buried, in the soil, returning to the soil, right? With each burial, the land is restored, contributing green space for the community to explore clean air and clean water. I mean, you can visit this place. You get a natural casket, so it could be like wicker or cloth. You choose a beautiful site. They value native plants. You can plant something native there if you would like, and they really work with you to do it in a way that's meaningful for you and your loved one. So, how might we confront death as Christians in a way that's life-giving? How might we reframe our posture around death and burial as something we aren't afraid of, but engaged in? How might we be a people who are deeply curious about the ecological impact we are leaving behind? And come on, when I smell flowers, I don't want to think about concrete tombs or bad curtains. I want to think about meadows. I want to think about sunshine. And I want to think about the world as God intends it to be. Grace and peace, friends.